Welcome. Tonight, we're going to travel back through the quiet corridors of history. You don't need to move. Just allow yourself to drift as we follow a winding path, one that stretches for thousands of miles across mountains, deserts, and valleys. A path paved not with speed or glory, but with long, grinding days, and countless lives who left little more than the echo of footsteps and the weight of dust. We'll begin, as all stories of walls must, with those who carried the stones, those whose backs bent beneath the weight of history itself. And then, slowly and gently, we'll explore the world they lived in, the rulers who commanded them, the mysteries they left behind, and the empire whose heartbeat was measured in rice bowls and imperial edicts. This won't be a tale of battles or glory, but one of routine, of repetition, of wind-blown clothes, stone-dusted hands, and nights spent under canvas or stars. Let your mind rest, let your breath slow, and imagine yourself standing beneath the rising wall. The dust settles, the wind dies, and the story begins. Imagine yourself waking before the sun, your sleep broken not by an alarm clock, but by the distant crack of a supervisor's whip. The air is cold, thin, and quiet, broken only by the muffled rustle of worn fabric and soft coughs echoing across the camp. You pull on the same rough hemp tunic you've worn for weeks, perhaps months, its fibers stiff with sweat and dust. Around you, others stir. Young, old, strong, frail, there's little distinction. You are all laborers now. The Great Wall is not a single wall, as we often imagine it. It is a patchwork, ancient and newer walls stitched together across dynasties, spanning mountains and cutting through deserts like a scar on the land. And you are just one of tens of thousands sent here to build it. Not a soldier, not a hero, likely a conscript, a farmer taken from his field, a criminal sent for punishment, a prisoner of war, sometimes even a tax debtor. One way or another, you found yourself here. The day begins with a bowl of rice porridge. If you're lucky, there may be a shred of pickled vegetable in it. It's warm but thin, more comfort than sustenance. Still, you eat quickly. No time for reflection. The worksite is a short walk from the camp, though the slope makes it feel much farther. The path is slippery with loose gravel, and your legs are already tired before the labor begins. Your job today is to help transport earth and stone. In the earlier periods, like under the Qin dynasty, you would be tamping earth into frames, using layers of compacted soil beaten down with wooden mallets. In later dynasties, like the Ming, bricks would be fired and carried, sometimes miles, by hand or wheelbarrow, stacked with mortar along ridges of cliffs. Your hands are already calloused, but the handles of the cart still bite into your palms. There's no machinery, no cranes, no protection, just sweat, muscle, and time. Some men sing softly an old folk song about returning home. Others hum as they work, rhythm helping the labor pass. But most are quiet, conserving energy. Conversation is rare, and laughter rarer. By midday, the sun is merciless. If it's summer, you feel it burning through your threadbare clothes. If winter, the wind whips across the stones, seeping through your bones. Either way, the day stretches ahead, and the wall keeps growing. You haul, you lift, you stack, you tamp, you sweep, you shape. Then you repeat. In the distance, a foreman calls out a correction. Someone has laid a brick wrong. Another's cart has tipped over. There is no patience for failure. Punishments can be swift, harsh, but more often, they're silent. A look, a mark next to your name. Fewer rations tomorrow. You rest once in the afternoon. A short break, sitting on the cold earth with your knees drawn up. You sip tepid water. It tastes slightly metallic, drawn from a basin covered in dust. Then back to work. As the sun begins to fall, the light paints long shadows across the stones. The wall, what little of it you've helped create, feels eternal somehow. But your body aches. Your fingers tremble. You've lost track of how many days you've been here. Nights are no better. The wind howls. The tents flap. Sometimes you hear coughs that don't stop, or murmured prayers, or men crying softly into their sleeves. Disease is common. Food is scarce. Escape is impossible, and for many, this is not a job, but a sentence. In some dynasties, it's said that more died building the wall than in the battles it was meant to prevent. Some were buried nearby. Others, perhaps, were buried in the wall itself, though historians debate that claim. Still, the legend persists, because the work left scars on the land, on the people, on memory itself. And yet, even in hardship, routines formed, bonds too. The slow familiarity of daily labor, the comfort of repetition, the warmth of a shared bowl, the resilience of the human spirit, even when stretched thin. You lie down, at last, on a straw mat that rustles with every breath. The stars above are sharp and cold. You wonder if the wall will ever be finished. And tomorrow it begins again. Before the wall, before the empire even had a name, there was a man who refused to die. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, was not born to rule the world. He was born Ying Zheng, son of a regional king during the chaotic warring states period, a time when China was not one country, but a fractured land of feuding territories, each trying to conquer the other. By the age of 13, Ying Zheng had inherited the throne of the Qin state, one of the most powerful and disciplined of the 7 major kingdoms. And from the moment he assumed control, it was clear he was not content with ruling part of the map. He wanted it all. Through brutal military campaigns, cunning diplomacy, and sheer force of will, he conquered the rival states one by one. It took over a decade, but in 221 BCE, he succeeded, uniting the territories under a single rule for the first time in history. And that's when he renamed himself Qin Shi Huangdi I, August Emperor of Qin. He believed himself to be more than a man. He believed he had reshaped the world. He abolished feudal systems and centralized the bureaucracy. He standardized currency, weights, and measures, even the width of cart axles. He unified Chinese script so that all regions could read the same language. He began massive infrastructure projects, canals, roads, and, of course, walls linking the northern fortifications into what would later become known as the Great Wall. But with power came fear. Shi Huangdi was obsessed with control. He feared rebellion. He distrusted scholars. He ordered thousands of books burned and buried Confucian intellectuals alive for defying him. And he feared death above all. He knew that even emperors must die, and that terrified him. So he launched a desperate quest for immortality. He summoned alchemists and magicians from across the empire. He demanded elixirs, potions, and scrolls, anything that might grant him eternal life. Some of these so-called immortality pills contained mercury, which ironically poisoned him slowly over time. He sent expeditions across the seas to find the mythical isles of the immortals, and even ordered ships built to carry hundreds of young men and women to search for this land. They never returned. In his lifetime, he also began constructing the most astonishing tomb in Chinese history. It was to be hidden beneath a hill in the Lishan Mountains, beneath a palace of earth. The tomb would be protected by rivers of mercury, guarded by booby traps, and shielded from time itself. But most famously, it would be watched over by an entire army of clay soldiers, what we now call the Terracotta Army. Thousands of life-sized warriors, each with different faces, hair, and armor, arranged in formation underground, silent, unmoving, eternal. Because if the emperor could not defeat death, he could at least control how he met it. When he died in 210 BCE, his death was kept secret for weeks while officials transported his body back to the capital. They feared chaos, and they were right. His son would soon take power and lose it. His dynasty, despite all the ambition, would collapse within just 15 years. But his legacy endured. The very name China is derived from Qin. And his wall, the one you imagined building in the last segment, was the first of many layers. Qin Shi Huang tried to live forever. And in a way, he did. But not in the way he wanted. Not in a way he could control. Now close your eyes and picture a field, silent, calm, just outside the ancient capital of Xianyang. From above, it looks like ordinary farmland, flat, green, perhaps a few low hills in the distance. But below the surface, hidden for centuries, was one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. An army standing in formation. Underground. In 1974, a group of farmers digging a well struck something strange clay fragments. At first, they thought it was an old kill, or perhaps shards from a buried pot. But the more they dug, the more they uncovered. Limbs, armor, faces. It wasn't one statue. It was thousands, each of them life-sized, each carved from clay, brick by brick, and each different from the next. They had topknots, beards, mustaches, bare faces. Some wore long robes and armor. Others carried weapons or led horses. You could walk row by row through their rank spearmen, archers, cavalry, officers, each arranged as if frozen in a moment of military readiness. They became known as the Terracotta Army, and they were built to protect Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, in the afterlife. The site was so massive that only a small part has been fully excavated. There are believed to be more than 8,000 soldiers, along with hundreds of horses, chariots, and acrobats, all entombed in silent service. But here's what makes it even more astonishing. These weren't mass-produced statues. They were handcrafted, piece by piece, by thousands of artisans. Each figure was built using modular parts, legs, torsos, arms, and heads, but then sculpted individually to ensure no two faces were identical. It wasn't just an army. It was a performance of loyalty in stone. Paint once covered their skin bright reds, greens, and purples that faded the moment they were exposed to air. Their weapons, once real bronze swords and spears, have long since oxidized or been removed. But even now, under dim museum lights or soft excavation spotlights, they exude a quiet power, a stillness that speaks of both pride and control. Because they weren't only guardians of the emperor's tomb. They were symbols of an empire's power, its ability to command art, labor, and time. And yet, there's a mystery. The emperor's tomb itself remains sealed. The burial mound just beyond the terracotta army has not been opened. Ancient texts describe rivers of flowing mercury inside, and modern soil tests near the site confirm high levels of mercury in the surrounding ground. Some believe there are traps inside crossbows triggered by air or collapsing tunnels meant to keep tomb robbers at bay. Others say it's an ethical choice to leave the tomb undisturbed until the technology exists to excavate it without damage. So it sleeps, still, silent, while the clay soldiers above it stand their eternal watch. You could spend hours walking among them, listening, wondering. What did the artisans think as they carved each face? Did they imagine these soldiers coming to life? Did they see themselves in the features? Were these guardians or prisoners? No one knows. And perhaps that's what gives the terracotta army its strange calm, its quiet hold on our curiosity. A reminder that even the most powerful men in history feared being forgotten and built their dreams in stone. So far, you have played as a young scholar navigating the treacherous waters of imperial court intrigue, and then as a humble farmer trying to eke out an existence on the edge of the empire. Now, let us return, not to the courts of emperors, but to the ridgelines, to the edge of the empire, where the earth turns to dust and the wind never stops blowing. Here, humanity scrapes against the raw materials of nature, both beautiful and harsh. Here you are, just another stone in the wall. You are back at the wall, but this time not as a builder. You're one of the soldiers now, one more mouth to feed, one more back to break. By the time of the Ming Dynasty, the Great Wall had been rebuilt and reinforced so that instead of being made of tamped earth, it now included fortified brick towers, stone-paved paths, and battlements stretching for miles. This section is just one part of the larger defense system that sprawls across the northern border, intended to keep out the nomadic tribes of the steppe. For the builders who first raised these stones and bricks, their purpose was clear. For the garrison stationed along it, life was just a long, slow test of endurance. You wake in a stone outpost tucked along a narrow ridge. It's early and the frost has crusted over your boots. There's no fire. The wood has to be conserved. You've slept under coarse wool blankets with your armor close by. There's been no attack in weeks, maybe months. Still, you're not allowed to let your guard down. Your meal is simple: a bowl of cold rice gruel, perhaps some pickled mustard greens if rations arrived on time. Occasionally, there's salted fish, tough as leather. Water is drawn from a nearby stream if it hasn't frozen over. Life is regimented. Waking before dawn, you follow the others in silent file to check your post. Each morning, you trudge along the battlements, stopping every few steps to wipe the sweat from your brow. The wind up here cuts like a blade. Your face is chapped, your hands swollen from exposure. You pace back and forth to stay warm, eyes fixed on the horizon. Most days there's nothing to see, just hills, just silence. Just time dragging slowly forward. The sun creeps higher, then begins its slow descent. You don't bother looking for clouds in the sky anymore. You know they'll melt away eventually, revealing endless stretches of blue, mocking your confinement. You've seen scholars debating the merits of different strategies, high officials arguing over logistics, farmers fleeing to safer lands. None of it means anything to you. Your only reality is the bite of wind and the ever-diminishing daylight. At least you're not alone. Around you are dozens of other stone fortresses, each housing a small garrison of soldiers. They exchange news with flags and smoke signals. Sometimes a message comes through mounted couriers riding fast across the plains. Red smoke for attack, blue for urgent dispatches, black for a death. Life here is almost monotonous, broken only by drills in the courtyard and repairs to the structure itself. When not on watch, you practice with a spear, the point blunted to prevent accidents. You lunge and thrust with your companions, calling out in mock combat. It's better than nothing, you suppose, as you tighten the straps on your helmet. Other times you fill cracks in the wall with new mortar, hauling buckets of water up a ladder, or haul rocks from the base of the wall and stack them neatly beside the path. The work is mindless, the hours slow. Sometimes a caravan approaches, the creak of carts and foreign voices from Central Asia. These trade convoys are watched carefully. Suspicion is always present. You've heard stories of smugglers, spies, and deserters hiding among them. Most traders are from the western regions, a mix of Han Chinese and foreigners. Their goods arrive in wagons pulled by oxen from far-off cities. Some of the merchants are rich, some poor. Their wares range from everyday necessities to luxuries for the wealthy. On rare occasions, an official from the Ministry of War or the Imperial Commission for the Control of the Grain, that's what they call the food inspectors, arrives to inspect the defenses or the state of your supplies. They wear richer robes, bring stronger wine, and stay only briefly. They never look long at your quarters. You suspect they're eager to leave as fast as they can. Rations are normally delivered by the granary. The grain comes milled into flour, which you turn into flatbread, porridge, steamed cakes. Whatever else can be made with salt, vegetables, and occasionally meat. Usually it's dog, but sometimes, if you're lucky, there's goat or mutton. You eat mostly in silence, though sometimes you share gossip with your bunkmates about life beyond the wall. There isn't much to say. Many have been here too long and have lost track of the seasons. Others have served for so many years, they hardly remember why they came. Stories come down from the older men of fierce battles with hordes of horsemen, daring raids, victories celebrated with fireworks and banquets. Maybe those days will return. You aren't sure you want them to. The nights are worst. Cold settles in like a second skin. The walls hold no warmth, and your bed is a wooden platform with a straw mat. You curl into yourself and try not to move. Sometimes you talk quietly with the other men. You swap riddles. You recite poems from memory, half-remembered verses about spring blossoms or the sound of a lute heard from across a river. Once a month, when the moon is full, the sky is a sea of silver. Sometimes, if the sky is clear, you might catch a glimpse of the Milky Way, a river of stars. In the darkness, the wind moans, rattling the windows. You pull your blanket tighter and listen to the beat of rain on the roof. And still, somehow, the old wall endures. It takes so much effort to maintain, to staff, to defend. You wonder why. Why is it here? What does it guard against? It seems so pointless, so empty. Why are you here? You've served your tour. You're due to rotate out with the next posting. And yet you remain. Perhaps it's because there's nothing else. Perhaps you're waiting for something else to come along. All around you, the land is cracked and barren. Not even weeds dare grow here. You haven't seen a tree in months, nor the green of grass. This is a world of browns and grays. The soil is like powder. It gets everywhere, in your clothes, in your hair, in your food. The dust sticks to your arms and legs like a second skin. Eventually, you learn to embrace it. It's the color of this world, the color of your life. If you had any choice in the matter, you would leave. But you don't. You're a cog in a machine built to last thousands of years. You're a soldier whose duty is to patrol, to watch, to endure. You stand on the brink of forever. You hear a fox's cry echo across the mountains. You pull your blanket tighter. The moon climbs, bright and silent above the ridgeline. The wind whispers secrets to the wall. Somewhere below you, a dog barks. Above you, the sky is filled with stars. And the wall stands still. Now, let's step away from the dust of the frontier and into the realm of belief. Not a belief in gods, but in order, in divine approval, in the invisible thread that bound emperors to heaven itself. It's called the Mandate of Heaven, a concept so central to Chinese history that, for over 2,000 years, it shaped every rise and fall of dynasty. But what exactly was it? Well, the Mandate of Heaven wasn't a written law. It wasn't bestowed by priests or confirmed in temples. It was more like a cosmic agreement. The emperor, the son of heaven, was said to rule not just by political power, but by moral authority. If he governed wisely and justly, then heaven smiled upon him and his dynasty prospered. But if he became cruel, corrupt, or unjust, heaven could withdraw its mandate. How would people know? They believed the signs were clear: floods that drowned fields, earthquakes that split cities, famine that blackened the mouths of children, rebellions rising from the countryside. These were not coincidences. They were warnings, the heavens expressing displeasure with the emperor. Nature and politics were inseparable. If disasters piled up, people whispered, "The mandate is lost." And once the idea took hold, it was unstoppable. Rebellions could now claim moral authority. Rival generals could proclaim themselves as restorers of balance. Dynasties collapsed not simply because of military defeat, but because they had lost the right to rule. It was a brilliant system, really. Flexible, convenient, dangerous. It explained why power changed hands, but also justified the change. It gave common people an explanation for their suffering. It allowed victors to claim legitimacy not just through force, but through virtue. But it was also terrifying, because it meant emperors lived in fear. A drought might mean more than a failed harvest. It could be a symbol of their moral decay, an eclipse, a cosmic warning, a rebel uprising in a remote province, the beginning of divine punishment. Some emperors would perform rituals to apologize to heaven after disasters. Others made sudden reforms, desperate to regain favor. And still others turned paranoid, lashing out at perceived enemies to prove they were still in control. Imagine being a farmer in the countryside. Your crops have failed for 3 seasons. Your village well is dry. Bandits pass more frequently than tax collectors. And then, one day, you hear a new leader has risen in the south, claiming that the emperor has lost heaven's blessing. And you believe it. Not because of politics, but because the fields are dust and the skies give no rain. That's our story for today. Did you find it interesting? Tell us in the comments below. And here's another story we think you might like. It's about a river that ran backward. You see, in ancient China, nobody questioned the order of things. Mountains were supposed to be tall, rivers were supposed to flow toward the sea, and the emperor was supposed to be obeyed. So when something seemed amiss, like the Han River suddenly flowing uphill, people panicked. Was this a sign of the end times? What did the scriptures say about rivers that ran backwards? As it turned out, nothing. This was a problem for which there was no precedent, no ritual, no obvious explanation. So people looked for one. They blamed floods, droughts, even earthquakes. Astronomers saw comets and foretold disaster. Scholars debated the merits of Confucianism and Taoism. After all, how could such an obvious outrage against nature be explained by one philosophy, but not the other? Over time, stories arose around the river, each more fantastical than the last. Perhaps it was the work of a mythical monster, a dragon or a giant turtle. Maybe it was a curse laid down by a mountain spirit. Or maybe, just maybe, the river had always flowed backwards. People just hadn't noticed. But when it came to questions like these, logic was no match for legend. And so the tale of the Han River became a thing of myth, passed down through the ages until it took on a life of its own. To this day, the story lingers in Chinese culture, a reminder of the human need to make sense of the world around us, whatever the cost. The mandate of heaven wasn't a superstition. It was a lens away to explain the world. In fact, it was one of the earliest examples of what we might call a pseudo-historical theory, an idea rooted in mythology but used to explain real-world events. It's similar to how some believe the Great Flood destroyed the Library of Alexandria, or how others blame the fall of Rome on a single corrupt emperor. These aren't historical facts, but pseudo-history. And yet, they've had very real effects on how we understand the past. By framing history as a series of divinely ordained events, the mandate of heaven may not have been entirely true, but it was undeniably powerful. In a way, it reminds us of the many ways we try to make sense of the world around us. Sometimes we rely on science, sometimes on faith, and sometimes on a little bit of both. For example, consider the strange patterns of history we often observe, like how war seems inevitable between nations, or how revolutions happen at regular intervals, how plagues strike without warning. At first glance, these events seem completely random, a jumble of causes and circumstances. But as we look closer, we begin to notice similarities, patterns that emerge from the chaos. This is where pseudo-history can be helpful. By identifying these patterns, we can start to develop theories that explain them. And while these theories may not be based on hard evidence, they can still help us better understand the world around us. Take, for instance, the idea that major historical events happen in cycles. We might argue that this isn't just a coincidence, but the result of a complex interplay of social, economic, and environmental factors. Just as the seasons come again and again, so too do certain patterns of human behavior. Of course, this doesn't mean that every war or revolution follows the same pattern. Each event is unique in its own way. But by recognizing the underlying similarities, we can gain a deeper understanding of the forces that shape our world. It's like trying to predict the weather. No two storms are exactly alike, but meteorologists use their knowledge of weather patterns to forecast what will happen next. Similarly, by studying the cycles of history, we can better understand the world we live in and the events that shape it. But this isn't always easy. Oftentimes, these patterns are hidden beneath layers of complexity. Take, for instance, the rise and fall of civilizations. On the surface, each civilization seems unique, shaped by its own set of circumstances. But when we step back and look at the bigger picture, we begin to see similarities. Most civilizations follow a similar trajectory from small settlements to sprawling empires. And most of those empires eventually collapse due to internal decay or external pressure. This pattern suggests that there are universal laws that govern the rise and fall of civilizations, laws that have nothing to do with the specific details of each society. Of course, not every civilization follows this pattern perfectly. There are exceptions and outliers. But by recognizing the general trend, we can gain insight into the forces that drive human societies. This is where pseudo-history can be especially useful. By identifying these patterns and coming up with theories to explain them, we can better understand the world around us. Sometimes these theories are based on little more than intuition and common sense. But even so, they can be surprisingly accurate. Take, for instance, the idea that major historical events happen in cycles. This isn't a scientific theory in the strictest sense, but it's a useful way to think about history. It helps us to see the bigger picture and to identify the patterns that shape our world. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should ignore the details. Each historical event is unique and should be studied as such. But it also means that we shouldn't get bogged down in the details. We should be able to zoom out and see the forest for the trees. This is an important skill for anyone who wants to understand history. It's the ability to see the patterns and cycles that shape our world. It's the ability to look beyond the here and now and to see the bigger picture. It's the ability to think historically. Of course, this isn't easy. It takes practice and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions. But it's also one of the most rewarding skills we can learn. Because when we understand the patterns of history, we can better predict what might happen in the future. We can see where we might be heading and make decisions accordingly. We can also appreciate the present moment more fully. When we understand the forces that shaped it, we can see how lucky we are to be living in this particular time and place. we can also see how our actions today will shape the world of tomorrow. So if you want to better understand the world around you, try looking at history in a new way. Look for the patterns and cycles that shape our world. Look beyond the here and now and see the bigger picture. Look at history through the lens of pseudo-history. Now, let us drift into the inner chambers of another world. A world of silk screens, embroidered shoes the size of a palm, and a beauty standard so intense, so ritualized. It reshaped the very body itself. This is the story of foot binding. It began during the Song dynasty, over 1,000 years ago, and persisted quietly, cruelly, into the 20th century. For centuries, millions of women in China had their feet deliberately broken and bound, often before the age of 7. Why? Because in many elite circles, a woman's beauty and her social value was judged not by the size of her eyes or the smoothness of her voice, but by the smallness of her feet. Specifically, the so-called lotus foot, a bound foot no longer than 3 inches in length. Let's imagine what that actually meant. You are 6 years old. Your mother prepares hot water and soaks your feet until the skin softens. Then, one by one, your toes, excluding the big toe, are folded underneath the sole. A binding cloth, tight as a corset, wraps around your feet. Bone grinds against bone. The arch collapses, and you are told not to cry too loudly. Over the next weeks, months, years, the bindings are removed, retightened, adjusted again and again. The pain is constant. You are taught to walk delicately with swaying steps. You learn to suppress discomfort, to move with grace. You are praised for your endurance. You are told this will help you marry well. You are told this is elegance. And for many, it was true. Small feet were associated with discipline, femininity, and upper-class refinement. It was believed that women who could not run or labor were more valuable because their families were rich enough that they didn't need to work. The bound foot was a status symbol, and in time, even lower-class families began binding their daughters' feet to improve marriage prospects. But it wasn't just about size. Women wore intricately embroidered shoes, bright silks, and tiny stitches, sometimes layered with talismans or lucky charms. These shoes were displayed proudly, a quiet testimony to the pain endured for beauty. And yet, life with bound feet was not gentle. Women still cooked, cleaned, carried children, even worked in fields. Their movements were slow, swaying, and often painful. Many developed lifelong infections, ulcers, and balance issues. In old age, falls were common. Bones often healed poorly, if at all. So why did it continue? Because it became normalized, embedded into culture, enforced by mothers who had endured it themselves, romanticized in poems, glorified in paintings, whispered about in terms of sensuality, obedience, and grace. And like many systems of control, it was made invisible until someone chose to break it. That change came slowly. Reformers in the late 1800s and early 1900s began to speak out against the practice. Some villages formed anti-foot binding associations. Girls who refused to bind were often shamed, but more and more chose to stop. By the mid-20th century, under the People's Republic, the practice was outlawed. But millions of women had already lived their entire lives in those tiny shoes. Some survived into the 1990s and 2000s, telling quiet stories to journalists or family. Their feet remained curled and rigid, even decades after the bindings were removed. And now their shoes sit behind glass in museums, silent, decorative, strange. They look impossibly small, and yet, for centuries, they were normal, a reminder that beauty, once defined, can reshape generations, and that control, once ritualized, can become invisible. In 1796, British traveler Joseph Edney visited a Chinese garden and saw a lotus blossom floating on the surface of a pond. He was struck by its delicate beauty, its fragile form, and thought to himself, how appropriate that such a flower should be used as a metaphor for a woman's foot. Throughout history, Chinese poets had celebrated the lotus foot, associating it with grace and femininity. And in the court of the Chinese emperor, a woman's feet were measured at age 14 to ensure they were small enough to qualify as a lotus foot. When I heard about this beauty standard, my first thought was, why would anyone willingly subject themselves to such cruelty? As a kid, I was fascinated by the Olympics and would spend hours watching gymnastics competitions. I admired these women's strength, flexibility, and dedication to their sport. But I remember being particularly captivated by the ribbons. They twirled and danced around them, transforming ordinary objects into symbols of elegance and grace. I wanted to be just like them. I begged my mom for ribbons, wanting to create my own graceful dance routines. And as I got older, I began taking ballet classes. I loved leaping and twirling across the floor, feeling the rhythm and music through my body. At some point, though, the focus shifted. As we moved on to more advanced techniques, I noticed that my teachers weren't just paying attention to how we executed our turns and jumps. They were also scrutinizing our bodies. They commented on my thighs, hips, and ankles. Then puberty hit. My body started changing, and I became acutely aware of every curve and angle. Suddenly, my ankles weren't dainty anymore. My thighs weren't lean. My hips weren't narrow. It was as if the thing I'd always loved about dancing was now somehow wrong with me. And without realizing it, I started trying to change myself. I cut out carbs, convinced that cutting pasta and potatoes would make me thinner. I stopped eating fruit because it contained sugar and fat. I ate salads with lettuce, carrots, and cucumbers. It became an obsession. I stopped enjoying food. I stopped enjoying dancing. All I could think about was how my body looked and how I could make it smaller. Then my mom intervened. She took me to see a doctor who diagnosed me with anorexia nervosa. The word anorexia comes from Greek and means no appetite. But for me, the word felt like a curse. I hated that I couldn't control myself. I hated that I couldn't control my body. After years of treatment, I am now able to eat and dance again. But it left me wondering, why do we put so much emphasis on our bodies? Why do we feel the need to change ourselves? And I realized that there's nothing new in this. It's been happening for centuries. Think about the women who practiced foot binding. In order to have small feet, they endured unimaginable pain. They wrapped tightly bound cloth around their ankles, causing long-term physical damage, warping their gait and curving their toes. And they did it for beauty, to be considered elegant and feminine, because a small foot was a sign of high social status. It reminds me of the gymnasts and the ribbons. Our bodies become objects to be shaped, controlled, and molded into something beautiful. Something that can be judged and evaluated by others. But when we start to lose sight of who we are as people and only focus on our appearance, We become vulnerable to the whims of society, susceptible to the biases and standards that are constantly changing. We cannot let our self-worth depend on the size of our feet or our thighs, ankles or waistlines. We are so much more than our physical attributes. We are artists and scientists and adventurers and dreamers. We are compassionate and creative and curious. And none of that can be summed up in a single glance. Let us now step into a quieter world, far from the battlefront, far from the emperor's court, into the study chambers of a scholar. It's early morning. Somewhere in rural China, perhaps in the Ming Dynasty, or maybe later in the Qing, you are the son of a modest family. Your father is a school teacher. Your mother keeps the household running. And from the moment you could sit upright, it was clear that your path was not farming, not soldiering, but study. Because one day, with enough ink, enough paper, and enough repetition, you might pass the imperial examination, the Kiju, and if you do, your life, and the life of your entire family, will change forever. This is the dream of the Kiju, China's infamous civil service exam system, one of the most rigorous and demanding intellectual gauntlets in human history. How does it work? Well, the process begins early, when you are still just a boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. You begin to memorize the Confucian classics, the Analects, the Mencius, the doctrine of the mean. You don't just read them, you recite them, word for word, almost like a mantra. These aren't light stories or easy poems. They are dense philosophical texts on virtue, governance, ethics, and ritual. You repeat them until they echo in your mind at night. Meanwhile, you master the basic skills of literacy, learning to write with a brush, mastering the creation of the Chinese seal. By the time you're a teenager, you may have committed over 400,000 characters to memory. That's more than the entirety of Shakespeare's works, and you can read hundreds of pages a day. Now, this is when the real pressure begins, because the exams themselves are multi-stage. First, local exams, then provincial, then the final, daunting palace examination in the capital. Each stage could take years. You might try again and again. Many scholars took the test dozens of times, failing repeatedly until age or poverty forced them to stop. Each attempt requires a new set of essays, a new demonstration of skill, a new level of proficiency in the classics. This is why the exam is known as the Kiju, meaning the testing of skills. What skills? Primarily writing. You are judged on your mastery of the written word, your ability to mold language to express and explore ideas. What kind of ideas? Mostly moral, political, and philosophical ones. This is an exam designed to find the ideal scholar official, someone who embodies Confucian values, someone who understands how to govern, how to legislate, how to conduct oneself with virtue. In essence, you are competing to become an enlightened servant of the state. But before we get there, let's talk about the testing itself. How does it work? What happens when you take the Kiju? Well, first, you must prepare yourself mentally and physically. Scholars would spend weeks meditating, eating special foods, exercising Tai Chi, trying to reach a state of calm, focused energy. Some even practiced sleeping while sitting. Next, you travel, usually on foot, sometimes for months, to reach the nearest testing center. Arriving early is key. The examinations were announced by a royal edict and lasted for several days. On the appointed day, you present yourself for inspection, along with thousands of other hopefuls. Officials check your documents, verify your identity, and then direct you to your brick cell. Here's where the true ordeal begins. You are locked inside a tiny room, barely large enough to sit up, let alone lie down. It has a single window high above you, barred and bolted. No furniture except a low table. Scholars are provided with a writing brush, inkstone, food rations, and bedding. The toilet is outside, behind a screen. That's it. No friends or family can visit. The only sounds are the scratching of brushes, the rustling of papers, the distant cough or sigh of fellow candidates. Time is kept by bells and drums. Sleep is fitful, punctuated by dreams of ink and paper. Food is eaten quickly between bouts of writing. The whole affair is exhausting, nerve-wracking, and dehumanizing. But you must remain resolute. Your main task is to write an 8-legged essay, a tightly structured prose piece that combines philosophy, politics, and poetry. It has 8 parts, hence the name. The first 2 deal with the assignment, a prompt given to all candidates. It may involve a simple question like, "What is righteousness?" or a complex problem like, "How should one govern a rebellious province?" The remaining 6 legs follow a strict formula. You start with an introduction, then explore your topic, delve deeper, provide examples, offer solutions, and finish with a conclusion. Along the way, you weave in quotes from the Confucian classics. You deploy puns and double meanings, metaphors and similes, allusions and rhymes. Above all, you strive for elegance. The 8-legged essay isn't just about ideas, it's about their expression. Once completed, your essay is bundled with the rest, sealed up and sent off to be graded. Then you wait. For now, you rest and recover, taking the next exam. If your head is clear, your eyes sharp, your hand steady, you stand a chance. The testing process is not the only thing that determines your fate. Luck plays a part too, along with social connections, bribes, political maneuvering, even favoritism. Bribery and cheating were common. It was said that a candidate could pass without knowing a single character of Confucius. The palace exams were notoriously corrupt, filled with backroom deals and influence peddlers. Once you passed, however, no one cared how you did it. You were officially a jinshi, a member of the elite class, your rank determined by your score. The highest ranks, banyan, were eligible for prestigious positions in the bureaucracy, becoming a county magistrate, a court official, a record keeper, even a tutor in the imperial household. With this honor came privileges. The right to wear fine clothes, ride a horse, display a distinctive crest. Your family might receive manors, titles, and financial rewards. Neighbors and relatives boasted of your success. Villagers celebrated with feasts and fireworks. Your home was a locus of pride. Scholars would often return to their hometown as heroes. Common people gathered around them, asking for advice, for help. You might even be immortalized, your name carved into stone tablets, your essays copied for others to study. Most scholars, however, did not pass. Even brilliant minds failed year after year. The competition was fierce. There were tens of thousands of applicants for each provincial exam and only a few hundred places. To give you some perspective, the odds of passing the Imperial Palace exam were roughly equal to getting into Harvard, Yale, Oxford, and Cambridge, all in the same year. So what drove these men? Why did they endure such hardship, expense, and humiliation? In a word, status. Imagine being able to support your family, escape poverty, rise to power and influence, all through the power of your mind. No martial prowess required, no wealth or connections, just your brain and your books. Plus, there was prestige in being a scholar, an air of superiority, a refined lifestyle. The scholar official was the ideal, the embodiment of wisdom and virtue. Many scholars led comfortable lives. Their days spent beneath paper windows, a scroll unrolling across a lacquered desk, your brush moving in silent strokes. Tea cooling nearby, candles flickering in the early dark. Outside, the world changed. But inside your study, it was just you, the words. You composed poems to the moon, translated lines of Mencius, dreamed of passing the next exam. It wasn't all quiet contemplation. As a scholar, you also had to know how to play the game, schmooze the right people, avoid controversy, navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. And even if you succeeded, the job itself could be grueling. Long hours, endless paperwork, fear of losing favor. It was said that being an official left one body thin and one heart fat. Still, the scholar's life held great appeal. The chance to climb the social ladder, the lure of ancient texts, the joy of mental exercise, the quiet satisfaction of a pen and ink. It was hard to resist. How many scholars passed the exam? We don't know. Records are incomplete and definitions vary. Estimates range from less than 3% to over 20%. But regardless of the numbers, we can appreciate the spirit of the scholar, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the endless memorization, the desire for self-improvement, the dream of a better life. In the end, whether you win or lose, whether you pass or fail, the scholar's life is defined by one thing: the quiet dedication to the classics, to the art of learning. It's an ethos that continues to resonate today in classrooms, libraries, and quiet rooms where people pore over books, sharpen their pencils, and dream of a brighter future. Now let the ink fade, let the scroll roll itself back, and return once again to the ridgeline, to the great wall where stone meets sky and silence stretches for miles. But this time, we're not here for history. We're here for ghosts. Because behind the official stories of emperors and engineers, bricklayers and guards, there is another history, a whispered one, the kind told by fires at night when the wind rattles the bamboo screens. These are the folk tales of the wall, and none is more famous than the story of Meng Jiangnu. The tale of Meng Jiangnu. A long time ago, no one is sure when, there lived a young woman named Meng Jiangnu. She was kind, quiet, and lived near the coast with her elderly parents. One day, she met a man named Fan Qiliang, a scholar hiding from conscription. They fell in love and married in secret. But their happiness was brief, for Fan was soon discovered and forced into labor on the Great Wall. No word came for months. Meng waited, prayed, and finally, when no letters arrived, she set off on foot to find him, traveling hundreds of miles alone, across forests and mountains. When she arrived at the wall, the workers gave her the news. Her husband was dead, buried somewhere in the wall itself. Meng collapsed in grief. She wept at the base of the wall for days, her sobs so powerful, so sorrowful, that the heavens themselves heard her. According to legend, her cries caused a section of the wall to collapse, exposing the bones of her husband. She gathered them, performed burial rites, and then, depending on the version of the tale, either drowned herself in the river or simply disappeared, her spirit walking the ridgeline forever. This story became legendary. It was told in villages for centuries, acted out in operas, carved into temple walls. Some say it symbolized the cruelty of imperial rule. Others say it was a love story, a protest, a myth wrapped around a deeper truth, that the wall was built not just with labor, but with sacrifice. Other folktales speak of workers buried alive inside the bricks to bless the structure or to silence complaints. Ghosts who appear during the full moon, dragging baskets of stone, whispering your name. There are tales of fox spirit shape-shifting creatures said to haunt the watchtowers. They lead soldiers astray in the mist, mimicking voices, causing men to vanish in the snow. And in some stories, the wall itself becomes alive. It shifts, moves, murmurs in the wind. It remembers every stone placed, every back broken, every tear shed. It becomes not a monument, but a witness. These stories aren't written in official records. They live in lullabies, in the warnings of grandmothers, in dreams passed down from the mountains. And when you stand alone atop the wall, in the quiet of night, with the wind curling around your feet, you just might hear a voice carried across the centuries, a woman weeping, a soldier humming, a whisper beneath the bricks. This place is haunted, not by one story, but many. By the footsteps of builders, the creak of tired shoulders, the memory of every life touched by the longest wall. Today, we remember Meng Jiangnu. Tomorrow, who knows whose tale will rise up to join them? The wall watches over all of us. I am just passing through, but perhaps my story will become part of this place too. In the 19th century, Chinese intellectuals often escaped the stifling heat of the cities by retreating to the countryside, taking rooms in quiet guest houses. Here they could read, write poetry, and cultivate an air of disheveled genius. A scholar's life was not easy. Before taking their exams, young scholars would spend years memorizing Confucian texts. Their success depended on committing thousands of characters to memory. To do this, they developed ingenious systems of mnemonic devices, associating each character with images that made them easier to remember. Many scholars began their studies in childhood. For some, preparation was a family affair. Fathers would teach their sons, sometimes starting when the boy was only 4 years old. As the son advanced in age and education, he would move on to study with other experts, living with them and their families. While living with these masters, he would cook, clean, and perform other domestic duties while continuing his studies. Despite the demanding lifestyle, many scholars found great pleasure in writing. They reveled in the feel of the brush on the paper, creating art with each stroke. The finest papers were made from the inner bark of the mulberry tree, a process that required skill and patience. Once prepared, the paper was ready to be written on with black ink made from soot. The scholar would dip his brush into the ink and glide it across the page, forming characters that represented not only words, but a way of life. The study of Confucianism was central to a scholar's life. Scholars memorized and commented on ancient texts, practicing their calligraphy with each new reading. For many scholars, their writing was a form of self-expression and a way to gain fame and recognition. Some became court officials, using their talents to serve the emperor. Others chose a life of poverty, living on the fringes of society and writing for its betterment. Through their art, these scholars immortalized themselves on the pages of history, leaving behind a legacy of words and wisdom for future generations to ponder. The scholar sits cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by piles of books and scrolls. His face is pale from years of studying by the dim light of an oil lamp. He takes a sip of tea, its warmth spreading through his chilled fingers. Suddenly, a commotion erupts outside. The scholar pauses, listening intently. Then he returns to his book, a small smile playing on his lips. He continues reading, lost in a world of words and wisdom. Outside, two men are arguing loudly. The scholar remains calm, unfazed by the noise. He knows that true peace comes not from the absence of chaos, but from within oneself. With renewed focus, he picks up his brush and begins writing, his movements graceful and precise. Each stroke of his brush adds another layer of meaning to the page, creating a masterpiece that will outlive the clamor of the marketplace. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the room, the scholar steps back to admire his work. He takes another sip of tea, savoring the moment. In this quiet room, far from the noise and distractions of the world, he finds solace and fulfillment. He knows that his life may not be wealthy or glamorous, but in the pursuit of knowledge and self-improvement, he has found true wealth and immeasurable joy. For the scholar, the journey of learning is not just about acquiring knowledge, but about cultivating wisdom and virtue. He understands that true wisdom lies in knowing oneself and one's place in the universe. He strives to live a life of integrity, compassion, and service to others, using his knowledge and skills to make a positive impact on the world around him. As the night deepens, the scholar settles in for bed. He reflects on the day's events and the progress he's made in his studies. With a sense of satisfaction, he lays down on his straw mat, ready for sleep. The rhythmic chirping of crickets fills the air, and the scholar drifts off to dreamland, his mind still pondering the mysteries of the universe. In his dreams, he travels to ancient lands where he debates philosophy with wise sages. He learns new ideas and concepts that expand his understanding of the world. As he sleeps, his mind continues to work, processing all the knowledge he's acquired during his lifetime. With the first rays of dawn, the scholar awakens refreshed and eager to start a new day of learning. He knows that the path of the scholar is a lifelong journey, but he embraces it fully, finding joy and fulfillment in the pursuit of knowledge and self-improvement. For the scholar, life is a precious gift that should be cherished and lived to the fullest. He approaches each day with gratitude, knowing that it is a new opportunity to learn, grow, and make a difference in the world. Whether he is writing, studying, or simply contemplating the mysteries of existence, the scholar finds contentment and purpose in his simple yet meaningful life. He is not driven by wealth, fame, or power, but by an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a desire to make a positive impact on the world. For the scholar, life is not just about accumulating material possessions or achieving worldly success, but about cultivating wisdom, integrity, and compassion. He values experiences, relationships, and the pursuit of knowledge above all else. To him, life is a gift to be cherished and a journey to be embraced with an open mind and a grateful heart. The scholar goes about his daily routine with grace and dignity. He performs his rituals with precision and mindfulness, finding beauty in the ordinary and meaning in the mundane. He takes care of his garden, tending to the plants and flowers with love and attention. He cooks his meals with care, savoring the flavors and appreciating the nourishment they provide. He dresses in simple but elegant garments, choosing quality over quantity and comfort over extravagance. In every aspect of his life, the scholar strives for balance and harmony, seeking to align his actions with his values and beliefs. He treats all living beings with respect and kindness, recognizing the interconnectedness of all things. He is generous with his time and resources, sharing what he has with those in need and supporting causes that align with his passions. To the scholar, life is a tapestry to be woven with threads of wisdom, integrity, and compassion. He approaches each moment with intentionality, striving to make a positive impact on the world around him. The scholar walks through the village, his robe billowing in the gentle breeze. He greets the villagers with a warm smile, engaging in conversation and showing genuine interest in their lives. He listens attentively, offering advice and counsel when asked, and shows empathy and understanding towards their struggles and joys. The villagers, in turn, hold the scholar in high regard, respecting his wisdom, kindness, and commitment to their community. They appreciate his willingness to help and his ability to see the best in people. To the scholar, being part of the community is an honor and a responsibility. He recognizes that true wisdom comes not just from books and scrolls, but from the shared experiences and perspectives of the people around him. He values their stories, traditions, and customs, and he works to preserve and promote them. The scholar continues his walk, his heart filled with gratitude for the simple pleasures of life. He takes in the sights, sounds, and smells of the village, appreciating the beauty and vibrancy of everyday existence. He sees the laughter of children, the warmth of family gatherings, and the generosity of neighbors, and he feels a deep sense of connection and belonging. To the scholar, life is a celebration to be embraced with joy and wonder. He approaches each day with a sense of awe and appreciation, recognizing that every moment is a precious opportunity to experience all that life has to offer. One day, the scholar receives an invitation to give a lecture at the Imperial Academy, an esteemed institution of higher learning in the capital city. He prepares diligently, spending weeks poring over ancient texts and practicing his rhetoric. He wants to honor the Academy's reputation for excellence and make his fellow scholars proud. On the day of the lecture, he travels to the capital in a simple cart, accompanied by a few students and disciples. He arrives at the Academy and is greeted with great fanfare. The scholars and dignitaries who have come to hear his lecture treat him with respect and admiration. After his lecture, the scholar engages in lively discussions with the audience, sharing his insights and answering their questions. He captivates his listeners with his intelligence, wit, and passion for learning. In the evening, the emperor himself invites the scholar to his palace for a private audience. Impressed by the scholar's knowledge and erudite, the emperor offers him a noble title and a position in the imperial court. The scholar is honored but declines the offer, choosing instead to return to his humble abode in the countryside. He realizes that true wisdom and fulfillment come not from wealth or status, but from a life of simplicity, authenticity, and service to others. The scholar departs from the capital, carrying with him the respect and admiration of his peers. He returns to his peaceful life in the countryside, where he continues to study, write, and mentor students. Over the years, his reputation as a wise and compassionate scholar grows, inspiring countless young minds to pursue the path of learning. As the years go by, the scholar's hair turns gray and his beard grows long. But his passion for learning and his commitment to his students never fade. He becomes a mentor and role model for generations of scholars, guiding them on their own journeys of self-discovery and enlightenment. One day, the scholar passes away peacefully in his sleep. His students and disciples gather by his side, mourning the loss of their beloved teacher. They remember his wisdom, kindness, and dedication to their shared pursuit of knowledge. After his death, The scholar is remembered as a great master, and his teachings continue to inspire and influence scholars for centuries to come. His legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of those he touched, reminding them to pursue wisdom, cultivate virtue, and live a life of integrity and compassion. Hey everybody, and welcome to this channel where we explore the unseen forces that have shaped our world. Today's topic is suggested by our patrons, and this episode is all about tea and porcelain. So let's get started. Now let us turn away from ghosts and follow something gentler. Steam rising from a clay teacup, a faint clink of porcelain, the whisper of silk along a merchant's sleeve. Because while emperors ruled and walls were built, China's greatest influence often left through the back door, quietly, delicately, on the backs of mules, in the bellies of ships, and in the lining of wooden crates. Today, we're going to talk about tea and porcelain and the quiet empire of global trade they helped create. Picture yourself in a small village in southeastern China. The hills roll like soft waves and the air smells faintly of damp leaves. This is tea country, where workers pluck delicate green leaves by hand each morning, and fires are stoked to dry and prepare them for packing. In nearby towns, porcelain kilns burn day and night, some of them massive complexes with their own villages built around them. Their craftsmen fire bowls and vases at temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius using secret glazes and local clay. When cooled, the finished porcelain is light, smooth, almost translucent, nothing like the earthenware used in other parts of the world. To outsiders, these products seemed almost magical, and they were in high demand. As early as the Tang Dynasty, Chinese goods began making their way west, via the Silk Road, through Persia, into the Arab world, and eventually into Europe. Later, during the Ming and Qing dynasties, maritime trade exploded. Chinese junks and later European ships carried crates of porcelain, bricks of tea, silk bundles, lacquered boxes, jade jewelry, and even scrolls of poetry. Imagine you're a merchant loading goods onto a ship in Guangzhou. The cargo includes blue and white porcelain bowls with lotus patterns, sealed boxes of compressed oolong tea, wrapped in paper and stamped with red ink, carved fans painted with seasonal poems, and satin robes dyed in cobalt and indigo. Your goods will sail across the South China Sea, past India, through the Persian Gulf, or around Africa to Europe. There, these items are luxuries. British aristocrats sip tea in delicate porcelain cups, placing them carefully onto matching saucers they call china, an adaptation of the Chinese word qinai. French nobles display massive Ming vases in their salons. Dutch traders fill entire Delftware factories trying to imitate the patterns. Sometimes the goods arrive without names. They are simply called exotic, mysterious, or in one word, Eastern. But there is a strange irony here, because while the world consumed China's tea and porcelain, many Chinese peasants, especially in the countryside, never owned the fine goods they produced. The finest vases were made for export. The best teas were bundled and shipped far from home. It was a silent trade, elegant, profitable, and often unequal. And sometimes it was dangerous. European demand for Chinese tea grew so strong in the 18th and 19th centuries that silver began to flow into China in enormous quantities. When the British couldn't afford the silver, they turned to opium, sparking a crisis that would lead to war. But that's a story for another segment. For now, just sit with the image. A scholar sips tea beneath a bamboo awning. A worker carefully paints the lip of a porcelain bowl. A Dutch sailor cradles a teacup thousands of miles from its origin, unaware of the hands that shaped it. Trade didn't just move goods, it moved taste. It shaped ritual. It quietly wove the world together, one sip at a time. Now we step again behind the curtain into the forbidden city, past the gilded gates of emperors and the perfumed corridors of concubines, but through the narrow, dim stone hallways where the palace's most paradoxical figures lived and served. This is the world of the eunuchs, men without families, men without sons, men without part of themselves. And yet, they were often the most powerful people in the palace. A eunuch's life began in pain. The procedure, castration, was sometimes voluntary, sometimes forced, and sometimes done in secret by desperate families seeking a path for their sons into the imperial household, because becoming a eunuch meant access. Eunuchs were permitted inside the inner court, the women's quarters, the private spaces of the emperor. Because they could not produce heirs, they were seen as safe, as incapable of threatening the royal bloodline. But this safety came at a price. Imagine it. You are a young boy, maybe 10, maybe 14. Your father cannot pay a tax debt. Your uncle whispers that the palace is looking for new servants. You are taken into a small room, told you will be well fed, well housed, maybe even promoted if you serve well. Then the pain comes and it does not leave. The recovery is long. Many do not survive it. But if you do, you begin the slow climb inside the palace machine. Eunuchs worked in every corner of the court. They were cooks, cleaners, tailors, scribes. But those who served directly under the emperor, they could wield enormous influence because while no one suspected a lowly palace servant of plotting rebellion, eunuchs who served the emperor closely, well, they could be trusted with important tasks, especially if they had risen through the ranks. These men knew the inner workings of the court, the rhythms of power, how to move within the palace walls. Some rose higher than ministers. They became gatekeepers, filtering who could see the emperor. They controlled information. They influenced decisions, sometimes even forging imperial edicts to serve their own purposes. And others, they became legends like Zheng He, the great Ming Dynasty explorer who commanded vast treasure fleets that reached India, the Middle East, and East Africa in the early 1400s. His fleet may have been motivated in part by a desire for tribute, but they were also a testament to the eunuch's potential, as well as an illustration of how far the emperor trusted certain eunuchs. There are other examples too, like Wang Shuren, a Ming Dynasty military strategist whose innovative ideas helped turn the tide against bandits and Mongol invaders. He was skilled, he was dedicated, and he was a eunuch. For all the ways in which eunuchs lost their voices, some still found ways to speak, to become famous, to exert control, even to rule. When the Yongle Emperor moved his court to Beijing in 1420, he brought with him 2,000 eunuchs from Nanjing. Here, deep in the heart of the new capital, they lived in a neighborhood known as the Lamp Yard because its streets were lit day and night. There were libraries and gardens and shops, as well as barracks where eunuchs trained in martial arts and practiced with weapons. Of course, many eunuchs spent little time outdoors. They worked in the palace, moving through shadowy corridors, tending to the emperor's needs, watching over his sons. They were there when the young prince was born, when he learned to walk, when he played with toys, and later, when he took on advisors. Eunuchs followed him everywhere. Because of their unique position, eunuchs could observe things others couldn't, especially the secrets of the ruler. When the Jiajing emperor became obsessed with alchemy and immortality, Eunuchs watched over his experiments, tending to furnaces, grinding herbs, preparing concoctions. When the Chongzhen emperor grew paranoid, lashing out at ministers and family members alike, eunuchs witnessed his rage and hid his excesses from the rest of the court. In the end, it was a eunuch who ended the Ming dynasty. While the Chongzhen emperor was barricaded in a room, sharpening a blade to take his own life, his grand counselor, Wang Chengyan, arrived with orders to commit suicide. No one knows what Wang was thinking that day, but whatever it was probably born in the quiet hours, in the long corridors of the palace. Like many eunuchs, Wang had served multiple emperors. He had seen the heights and depths of power. He understood how precarious balance was, how quickly it could tip. And when the Chongzhen emperor died, he acted, seizing control and ushering in the Qing. We'll talk more about eunuchs in the Qing dynasty soon, but first, let's return to the eunuchs of the Ming dynasty. Unlike the Confucian elite, eunuchs did not read the classics or study with mentors. Their education, if you want to call it that, happened on the job. New recruits were taught the rules of the palace, how to behave, how to speak, how to move, how to hold their chopsticks. Sometimes older eunuchs would mentor younger ones, teaching them skills or offering advice, but mostly they taught them how to survive. Life for eunuchs was not easy. There was constant pressure to prove themselves, to show that they deserved the privilege of working in the imperial palace. They were outsiders, always having to prove themselves, always vulnerable to the whims of the emperor. Most eunuchs served with quiet diligence. They knew that the emperor relied on them, and they wanted to justify that trust. It wasn't glory, but it was purpose. Others turned to religion. Buddhism and Taoism were popular, but many eunuchs developed their own beliefs, blending various traditions, drawing from scripture and philosophy, but also incorporating their experiences. In the end, eunuchs grappled with the same questions as everyone else, questions of identity, purpose, family, and the meaning of life. What made them different was the unique set of circumstances that shaped their answers. For some eunuchs, their lives were an endless search for community. They joined brotherhoods, formed social clubs, and welcomed any visitors from their home regions. For others, their personal mission became helping others, mentoring young eunuchs, caring for the sick and elderly. Some found solace in serving the emperor, elevating the role to a kind of religious devotion. Others turned to poetry, filling scrolls with verses about loneliness, loyalty, or the strange stillness of a life lived between categories, not man, not woman, not common, just a servant. Scholars debate whether eunuchs were more or less powerful than their literati counterparts. We know that eunuchs were vital to the smooth functioning of the palace. We know that eunuchs wielded enormous soft power. We know that some held lives and fates in their hands. But we also know that eunuchs were vulnerable to the whims of the emperor, that they could be disgraced in an instant, banished from the palace with nothing, executed in purges meant to cleanse the palace. Most eunuchs worked quietly, striving for excellence, trying to disappear. They wanted to be indispensable, not notorious. Still, some eunuchs became infamous, like Wei Zhongshan. If you haven't heard of him, you're not alone. Wei rose to power in the late Ming era, where he became so influential that entire officials' careers rose or fell at his nod. He built temples to himself. He silenced critics, and he ruled from the shadows. We'll talk more about him in future episodes. And when the dynasties crumbled, many eunuchs were cast out, forgotten, or executed in purges. They disappeared from the halls they had once ruled, but their legacy remains, hidden between the folds of scrolls, whispered in the margins of history. Stories of the men who served closest to the throne, but never sat upon it. Eunuchs have appeared in many cultures throughout history, but today we focused on the eunuchs of China. Now go back and listen to this episode again. And next time, why not explore the fascinating lives of Chinese prostitutes? Now we drift forward to the last dynasty, to the final chapter of imperial rule, to a time of silk-robed courtiers sipping tea while cannon fire echoes at the gates. This is the Qing dynasty, the last to rule China, a dynasty of splendor and unraveling. And its fall would be brought about not by swords alone, but by trade, opium, and a rapidly changing world it could no longer control. The Qing dynasty began with strength. Founded by the Manchus in the 1600s, it expanded China's borders to their greatest historical extent, incorporating Tibet, Xinjiang, and Mongolia. The imperial court was disciplined, the bureaucracy well-oiled, the arts flourished, the population soared. But beneath the polished surface, pressures were building. By the 1700s, Europe was obsessed with Chinese goods, tea, silk, porcelain, and lacquered furniture. But China didn't need much from Europe in return. It maintained a trade surplus, accepting only silver as payment. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing. For centuries, this system worked in China's favor. But that all changed when it came to one particular commodity, tea. Europeans loved the stuff. They drank it by the shipload, and that meant a massive amount of silver was flowing out of Europe and into China. By the mid-1700s, Europeans were desperate for a way to pay for all this tea without draining their coffers. So Britain sought a suitable alternative, something China would also want, something they could profit from: opium. Cultivated in British-controlled India, it was trafficked into China, where it quickly became popular among the populace. Soon enough, millions were addicted. By the 1800s, the situation had become dire. Chinese officials tried to ban it, confiscated shipments, once even destroyed 1.2 million pounds of opium stored in Canton. In 1839, Commissioner Lin Zexu famously wrote a stern letter to Queen Victoria demanding an end to the trade. The British ignored it. The following year, war broke out, the First Opium War. The Qing Navy, outdated and chronically underfunded, was no match for sleek British steamships. In 1842, the Qing lost. The Treaty of Nanjing was humiliating. It ceded Hong Kong to the British, opened 5 treaty ports, and granted Britain most favored nation status, meaning any trading rights granted to one nation would automatically be extended to Britain. It was the first of many unequal treaties, which only made the cracks in the Qing facade wider and deeper. More wars followed, more territory was lost. More foreign concessions appeared on Chinese soil controlled by France, Russia, Germany, and Japan. Meanwhile, internal rebellions erupted. The most catastrophic was the Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864. It pitted various Christian missionaries against the Qing, but really it was a larger anti-Qing movement led by Hong Xiuquan, who proclaimed himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ, come to conquer China and establish a heavenly kingdom of great peace. Though his movement failed, it still claimed over 20 million lives. Later, the Boxer Rebellion attempted to drive foreigners out through violent resistance, but only provoked another international invasion. As all this chaos unfolded outside the Forbidden City, Some emperors were barely more than boys. One ruled in name only, with court eunuchs and dowagers pulling the strings. That included the famous Empress Dowager Cixi, both revered and reviled. She held power behind the throne for decades. Resisting modernization, she feared it would erode Qing control. Railways were stalled. Telegraphs were resisted. Industrialization limped forward. Meanwhile, Japan, once the little brother, modernized rapidly. Then in 1904, it defeated China in war. By the early 1900s, it was clear the old world was collapsing. Imperial China was already 2,000 years old by the time the Qing took power. And by the early 1900s, it was clear that its best days were behind it. In 1911, after nearly 300 years, the dynasty fell. The last emperor, Puyi, a boy of just 5 years old, was placed on the throne, then removed before he even understood what power meant. On February 12, 1912, at around 3:30 in the afternoon, word reached the palace that the Qing government had resigned. The revolution was complete. The last imperial government in China was no more. Around this time, it is said that a young man was sweeping the courtyard outside the main gate of the Forbidden City. He paused to watch a white flag lowered from the top of the tower, the symbol of the Qing dynasty fluttering in the breeze. As he watched, he felt a lump in his throat and tears pricking his eyes. The world was changing fast. Revolution had swept across China. But here in the heart of the Forbidden City, the past was still palpable. On the first day of the first month in the year 1912, before the sun rose, Emperor Puyi woke up in his lavish bedroom inside the Forbidden City. He was 5 years old. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating motes dancing in the air. On the table beside his bed sat a steaming mug of hot milk, his night nurse patiently waiting. Before he knew it, men bustled in bearing imperial robes. He was helped into silk pajamas embroidered with dragons and phoenixes. Soon he was dressed and ready for the day. Little did he know, it would be the last day he would ever wear them. He spent his morning playing with his toys, his nurses and servants catering to his every whim. Outside the Forbidden City, the Qing government was crumbling. But within its high walls, life went on as normal. There were lessons to learn, of course. The young emperor was taught the intricacies of governance by his counselors. He learned about his ancestral home, the sprawling estate outside Beijing known as the Summer Palace. He heard stories of his forefathers, of the long line of emperors who had ruled China for over 2,000 years. After lunch, the emperor played with his pet dogs, golden retrievers and Pekingese. Sometimes he rode a horse or took a boat ride on the Kunming Lake. In the afternoon, he might have taken a stroll in the gardens, marveling at the carp leaping in the ponds or the orchids blooming in the courtyards. His evening started with dinner, served on gold and silver plates, accompanied by wine and delicacies from the imperial kitchens. After dinner, it was back to his study for more lessons. Before bedtime, he might have attended a theatrical performance, watching troops of actors in elaborate costumes portraying historical tales or local legends. Finally, tucked into bed, he slept soundly, dreaming perhaps of dragons and phoenixes, symbols of power that adorned his silk bedding. When he woke up the next morning, everything would be different. The Qing dynasty was no more. By the time Puyi was born, his father, Emperor Tongzi, was already ill, so the young boy never really knew him. His mother, Empress Dowager Cixi, was a strict disciplinarian, keeping everyone in the Forbidden City on edge. She ruled the country from behind the curtain, making major decisions with little input from her son. Pui had a couple of older sisters, but they were sidelined, victims of a long-standing practice of killing or enfeoffing the princes and princesses of the previous emperors. It was done to prevent any potential rivals to the throne. As a result, the Forbidden City was often a lonely place for the young emperor. He had his nurses, eunuchs, and servants, but he spent most of his time alone. The sprawling complex of courtyards and palaces offered plenty of space to explore. He must have wandered the grounds, marveling at the ornate architecture, the red walls and golden roofs. He likely played hide and seek among the many halls and gardens. Despite being half black, he knew nothing of his Manchurian ancestry. Instead, he was told that he was descended from the Yellow Emperor, a mythical figure from ancient times. He heard stories of the glories of the past, of how his ancestors had built the Great Wall and ruled over a vast empire. He experienced the seasons change from the relative warmth of the palace. In the spring, he may have watched in fascination as the famed flowering crabapple trees bloomed in the imperial gardens. Summers were hot and humid, but he probably enjoyed the dragon boat races on the Kunming Lake. Autumn brought cooler temperatures and the chance to take in the beautiful colors of the maple trees. Winters were harsh, but he was safe inside the palace with its heated floors and thick walls. In the evenings, when it was too cold to go outside, he entertained himself by flipping through picture books with colorful illustrations of historical scenes or mythical creatures. Other times, he watched court officials parade in and out of the main gate, each movement carefully choreographed. Sometimes he saw military displays, soldiers practicing martial arts or cavalrymen riding their horses in perfect unison. When he was older, he attended banquets in the Grand Throne Room, marveling at the sight of hundreds of courtiers dressed in their finest clothes. During the Lantern Festival, he would have delighted in the vibrant display of lanterns illuminating the night sky, their shadows dancing on the palace walls. When his father died, Pui was just 3 years old. His mother, the Empress Dowager, assumed control, governing in his name. Life for the young prince continued much as before, surrounded by the rituals and traditions of the imperial court. As he grew older, he faced a future mapped out for him. His destiny was to be the figurehead of the Qing dynasty, a puppet ruler with real power residing in the hands of his mother and other advisors. The thought of such a predetermined life may have filled him with a sense of foreboding. His world was one of rigid hierarchy and unspoken rules. While he enjoyed moments of joy and wonder, there were also times of fear and loneliness. Little did he know that his childhood within the Forbidden City walls was coming to an end. The winds of change were blowing, threatening to sweep away centuries of tradition and turn China's future toward the unknown. On February 12, 1912, the Qing government resigned. Pui, the last Qing emperor, abdicated the throne. His life as a young monarch in the Forbidden City was over. The next day, he moved out along with his family, marking the end of 2,000 years of imperial rule in China. The Forbidden City, once home to a multitude of emperors and empresses, was now a museum open to the public. Its halls and courtyards echoed with the memories of a bygone era. Now we step away from dynasties and battles, and into a chamber lit by oil lamps, a hush of silk slippers, the soft trill of a lute, and the faint scent of plum wine in the air. This is the world of the courtesans, artists, performers, companions, and women whose lives were lived at the delicate intersection of talent, beauty and survival. Unlike the concubines of the imperial court, who were hidden behind walls and protocol, courtesans moved in the tea houses and pleasure quarters of cities like Hangzhou, Suzhou, Nanjing, and later Shanghai. They were not prostitutes, at least not in the beginning. The highest-ranking courtesans, especially during the Tang, Song, and Ming dynasties, were prized not for their bodies, but for their refinement. They were expected to be accomplished poets, skilled musicians, masters of calligraphy, elegant in dress and conversation. In many ways, they were cultural celebrities, entertaining poets, scholars, and government officials with wine, verse, and quiet conversation. A well-known courtesan might be compared to a painter's brushstroke, fleeting, elegant, admired, but never fully owned. Imagine a scene. You're a minor official visiting a tea house after dusk. Lanterns bob along the canal outside. Inside, musicians pluck pipe strings in the corner, while the host introduces you to a courtesan named Zhao Lian. She is dressed in a soft pink robe. Her hair is pinned with silver ornaments, and in her hand is a painted silk fan, which she uses to hide her smile as she quotes a line of Tang poetry, one you thought only you remembered. She pours you tea, not because she must, but because it's part of the performance. This moment is an art form, but life behind the beauty was often harsh. Many courtesans were sold into their profession by impoverished families. Trained from a young age, they learned music, etiquette, and dance alongside reminders that they were commodities to be marketed, booked, praised, and eventually replaced. They lived under the watch of madams or brothel owners who took a cut of their earnings. Success brought gifts, notoriety, and admirers, but not true freedom. They could not marry freely. They could not own property easily, and as they aged, they often faded from public favor. Still, some rose above their stations. Courtesans like Li Shishi during the Song dynasty became so famous that even emperors visited them. Others published poetry under pen names, their verses filled with longing, wit, and heartbreak. Sometimes, a wealthy patron would redeem a courtesan paying for her release and marrying her. But more often, these stories ended quietly, with retirement, obscurity, or worse. What remains today are fragments, paintings of women holding fans beneath moonlit balconies, poems exchanged between scholar and courtesan, written in watery ink, a few preserved hairpins once slid into dark, glossy hair before an evening of song, and the memory of a role that was neither noblewoman nor servant, but something entirely in between, elegant, lonely, endlessly complex. Now we move to the ocean's edge, to a place where the sails of European ships appeared like ghosts on the horizon, where powdered wigs met silk robes, where cannon fire echoed across tropical islands, and where China, ancient and proud, first collided with the ambitions of a very different kind of empire. This is the story of when the Dutch came to China, a strange, tense, and occasionally absurd clash between East and West. The time is the 17th century. The Dutch Republic is rich, hungry, and ambitious. Its ships dominate global trade routes, and the Dutch East India Company, a corporate behemoth, seeks to break China's tight grip on the porcelain, tea, and silk trades. But there's a problem. The Ming dynasty isn't interested. Chinese officials at the time saw foreign traders as barbarians, useful at times, but not equals. Trade was tightly controlled, limited to tribute missions, and monitored through Canton or a few select coastal zones. Private trade? Forbidden. But the Dutch didn't like being told no. So, in 1622, they tried something bold. They attempted to seize the island of Macau, a Portuguese-held trading post off the southern coast of China. They failed badly. Frustrated, they looked elsewhere and soon captured southern Taiwan from local inhabitants. From there, they tried to negotiate trade with Ming China. And when diplomacy stalled, they resorted to piracy. Dutch ships began raiding Chinese junks, capturing cargo, and demanding that the Ming government grant them trading rights. They even blockaded parts of the coast, hoping to force negotiations. But the Ming were stubborn and proud. One Chinese admiral reportedly refused to even meet Dutch envoys face to face, forcing them to kneel and communicate through intermediaries. The Dutch were confused, angry, and bewildered by the strict rituals of Chinese diplomacy. Eventually, the Dutch would be pushed out of Taiwan entirely. In 1662, a Chinese pirate-turned-warrior named Zheng Chenggon, known in the West as Koxinga, led a fleet of thousands to expel them. The Dutch surrendered Fort Zeelandia after a long siege, marking the end of their brief foothold. Koxinga claimed Taiwan in the name of the Ming loyalists, and for a brief moment, the island became a last outpost of imperial resistance. But for the Dutch, it was an embarrassing defeat. Still, the impact lingered. The Dutch, and later the British, French, and Spanish, learned a critical lesson. China could not be entered easily, not by force, not by threats, not yet. But the desire for China's goods, especially tea and porcelain, only grew. And in the decades to come, Europe would find new ways to break through China's coastal defenses. Not with cannons, but with opium, silver, and treaty ports. For now, though, imagine that uneasy encounter. A Dutch officer in a starched collar, bowing awkwardly before a Confucian official who insists on ritual bows and ceremonial gifts. Neither man understands the other, but both know this is the beginning of something strange. The age of isolation is cracking, and the horizon holds ships. And now the curtain falls. Let us walk slowly through the red gates of the Forbidden City one final time. Past the painted beams, past the rows of courtiers, past the throne room, now still and echoing. This is not the world of emperors as you've imagined them, powerful, commanding, divine. This is the story of a child, a boy given an empire, already fading away. This is the story of Puyi, the last emperor of China. He was just 2 years old when he was chosen. In 1908, with the Qing dynasty crumbling, Empress Dowager Cixi, on her deathbed, appointed Puyi to succeed the ailing Guangzhou emperor. Too young to understand what was happening, he was dressed in yellow silk and placed on the dragon throne. Officials bowed, drums thundered. He cried for his nanny. In theory, he was the son of heaven. In reality, he was a toddler in a collapsing palace. Only 3 years later, in 1911, the Xinhai Revolution swept across China. Provinces declared independence. Warlords seized power, and a new republic was declared. In 1912, the child emperor was formally abdicated. He was allowed to remain inside the Forbidden City under a strange agreement, still treated as emperor within the walls, but powerless beyond them, like a bird in a gilded cage. There, he grew up surrounded by eunuchs, rituals, and fading grandeur. Imagine his days. He wakes in embroidered sheets, is dressed by servants, bows to empty throne rooms, receives reports with no meaning. Outside, the world is changing. Trains whistle in the distance. Crowds protest in foreign suits. China is modernizing, fragmenting, slipping away, and still, within the palace, he plays. As a boy, he was lonely and curious. He tore up ancient scrolls, unaware of their value. He was taught Confucian classics and English at the same time. He was both emperor and prisoner, worshipped and ignored. Eventually, even that fragile world was taken from him. In 1924, a warlord evicted him from the Forbidden City. He left quietly, no army, no parade. Just a fallen monarch, stepping through a side gate, clutching the last of a 2,000-year dream. But his story didn't end there. Hui lived many lives. In the 1930s, the Japanese installed him as puppet emperor of Manchukuo, a fake state in northeastern China. There, he ruled in name only, a prisoner of diplomacy and militarism. After World War II, he was captured by the Soviets, then returned to China, where he was imprisoned for 10 years. In the 1950s, he was released and re-educated under the new communist government. He became a simple gardener in Beijing. He filed into meetings like everyone else. He wore gray like everyone else. He died in 1967 during the Cultural Revolution. Not as an emperor, but as a quiet man in a shared apartment, remembered by neighbors as polite and soft-spoken. The last ruler of the Dragon Throne, who once had hundreds bowing at his feet, now waiting in line for his ration of rice. And yet, there is something strangely peaceful about his end. Hui lived through the end of imperial China, the rise of a republic, a foreign occupation, and the birth of modern communism. He was the bridge between two Chinas, one ancient, one modern. He once said, "I was emperor in name, but I never ruled. I was a puppet in a game I never understood." And so, with him, the last page of imperial history turned. The throne was empty. The scrolls rolled shut, and the dream of divine rule finally faded. But history remembers. And even now, in the quiet corners of the Forbidden City, if you listen closely, you might hear the whisper of silk shoes on polished stone, the clatter of a child's toy in a marble hall, and the echo of a boy emperor's sigh beneath a painted sky. The dynasty is gone, but the story remains. And now, our long journey through ancient China has come to a close. We've walked dusty roads beside peasants and poets, stepped inside hidden chambers of the Forbidden City, listened to whispers behind the Great Wall, and watched quietly as dynasties rose and slowly crumbled into silence. You've seen the world through the eyes of laborers, emperors, rebels, and dreamers. You've drifted through bamboo groves and palace gardens, crossed deserts, climbed stone towers, and waited patiently through centuries of change. And now, it's time to let it all fade. The scholars have blown out their candles. The courtesans have folded their fans. The watchmen have stopped their pacing along the wall. The cities are quiet. The scrolls have been put away, and the dust has settled on history once more. So wherever you are, close your eyes, rest easy. The past will keep until morning. Thank you for being here. Good night.